There's a certain stillness that settles in your bones after 50. It's not peace, not by a long shot. It's more like a quiet acceptance that life isn't always going to give you the answers you want. But tonight, on this crisp fall evening, that stillness is a mask, a fragile one. Behind it, I'm simmering. Tonight, everything changes. I glance around the living room, my eyes flickering from face to face, old family photos staring back at me from the mantel. The scent of apple pie and roasted turkey fills the air as everyone is talking and laughing. Thanksgiving at our place, it was my idea. I figured if I was going to set a trap, I might as well do it with style. Mary, my wife for the last 32 years, is holding court by the fireplace. She's smiling, her laughter carrying over the chatter like it always does. To anyone else, she's the picture of warmth and grace, the doting wife, the glue that holds our family together. But me, I see it differently now. 3 months ago, I stumbled onto the truth. A late night at work turned into an early one home, and that's when I saw it. Her phone, carelessly left on the kitchen counter, buzzed with a message. I shouldn't have looked. 30 years ago, I wouldn't have, but something gnawed at me, a sixth sense, maybe. Call it the wisdom of age or just years of being around the same person. You start noticing things, the way someone suddenly looks down when they used to meet your eyes, or how their voice sharpens when you ask simple questions. That night, as the message lit up the screen, it was like a knife twisting in my gut. The name on the screen wasn't one I knew, and the words, well, they told me everything. Can't wait for tomorrow. Same place. Same place. The hell does that mean? For 3 days, I replayed that phrase in my head, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. But I wasn't. It was as plain as day. She was meeting someone. Tomorrow came and went, and so did my trust. I confronted her, of course. She brushed it off with a laugh, told me it was nothing. Just a work thing, she said. You're being ridiculous. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. 32 years isn't something you just throw away on a hunch. But there were signs everywhere after that. Late night meetings, quick conversations she'd end the second I walked in the room. That slight change in her perfume, a little too strong, a little too often. And so I waited, watched, until I was sure. Now here we are, with her family filling up every room in the house, laughing at old stories, raising their glasses, and acting like everything is perfect. But in less than an hour, all of this is going to change. I have a plan. I take a sip of my bourbon, the warmth of the drink doing little to ease the cold anger that's been coiled in my chest for months. I can't do this alone, I've thought more than once, but today I don't have to. I've brought in a guest, someone she won't expect, someone who can confirm everything I need confirmed. In the corner, Danny, my nephew, is talking to her. He's an IT guy, smart kid, good with tech. He owes me a favor from a few years back when his business was struggling, and he knows better than to ask too many questions when I called him in. I told him what I needed, some help with her phone. He'd been reluctant, of course. Are you sure, Uncle Rick? You don't want to go accusing Aunt Mary unless... I'm sure. I'd cut him off. Every time I think of that message, I remember how cold her voice was when she dismissed me, how easy it was for her to lie. Danny had handled the rest, slipping her phone when she was out of the room, setting up a backup system for her texts and calls. That was 2 weeks ago, and tonight I've got all the proof I need. I can feel it buzzing in my back pocket. The screenshots, the messages, the rendezvous she'd been planning. The plan was simple. I'd wait until she felt comfortable, confident in her lies. Let her bask in the glow of family. Let her think she's pulled one over on me. And then, when everyone was settled, I'd drop the bomb. I take another sip, my eyes narrowing as I watch her across the room. She catches me looking, flashes me that familiar smile. For a second, it almost works. For a second, I almost believe it's still real. 32 years doesn't just vanish overnight. But then I remember the message, the meetings. I remember the truth. Dinner is just about ready when I decide to make my move. Plates are being set out, the kids are running around the table, and the conversation has shifted to old stories. Family trips, weddings, and birthdays long past. Mary's busy directing the traffic, her back to me. Perfect. I clear my throat. Hey everyone, before we sit down, I've got something I need to say. The room quiets, and I can feel all eyes on me. My heart's pounding in my chest, but I keep my face calm, collected. I'm not going to let her see me sweat. Not yet. I've been doing some thinking these last few months. I start slowly, watching her as she turns to face me. Her brow furrows just a little. Confusion. 32 years is a long time, you know? You build a life, raise kids, make memories.
Hey there, life is full of unexpected twists, just like the stories we share here. If this story touched you or made you think, consider subscribing to our channel. Every day, we bring you powerful real-life experiences of betrayal, resilience, and the strength it takes to keep going. Don't miss out. Join our community today, where we value truth, courage, and the lessons life teaches us.
My voice trails off as I glance around the room, all those expectant faces looking back at me. And sometimes, you find out things aren't always what they seem. I pull my phone from my pocket, my thumb hovering over the screen. Sometimes, you learn the people closest to you aren't always telling you the whole truth. I hear a slight intake of breath from across the room. Mary's eyes widen, her face going pale as I hold up the phone. I wanted tonight to be special. I really did. But there's something I've got to share first. I pause, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I tap the screen. The photos, the messages, everything. I let it play out on the TV for the whole family to see. The moment the first text appears on the screen, the room falls silent. I hear the clatter of forks being set down, the shuffle of chairs as people lean forward. There's confusion at first, an awkward, collective effort to process what's happening. A few people whisper, their voices barely audible, and I can feel the tension rippling through the room like a slow-building storm. Mary's standing frozen near the fireplace, her smile gone. Her eyes dart from the screen to me, then back again. Her face goes pale as the first messages flash on the TV. The color drains from her cheeks, and for a split second, she almost looks like a stranger to me. The texts between her and him begin as mundane. But it doesn't take long for the truth to unravel, laid out for everyone to see. I miss you. Wish I could see you tonight. Meet me at the hotel again. Same room. No distractions this time. Then the photos, pictures of her smiling at a restaurant I don't recognize. A man's hand on hers. More messages hinting at secret meetings, at shared nights and plans for a future that didn't include me. And there it is, everything I've been carrying for months, finally spilling out into the open. The murmurs grow louder now. Mary's sister, Barbara, lets out a shocked gasp, covering her mouth with one hand as she stares at the screen, wide-eyed. The kids are pulled from the room by their parents. My son, Chris, hurriedly ushering his two teenagers out, shielding them from what's unfolding. I hear my daughter-in-law whispering to him, "What is this? What the hell is this?" I don't answer. My eyes are fixed on Mary. I want to see it. I want to see the moment when she realizes there's no going back. No more lies. No more half-truths. I want her to feel what I've felt. But she just stands there, motionless, her mouth opening and closing as if trying to form words, but none come. And then, suddenly, it's like a dam breaks. "Rick," she says, her voice higher than usual, almost panicked. "What the hell are you doing?" Her hands fly up, waving at the TV as if she could somehow erase the messages, wipe them from everyone's mind. "Turn that off. Right now." But no one moves to help her. Everyone's watching, my brothers, her cousins, nieces, nephews, the whole damn family, staring at her like she's something they can't quite recognize. The room that was once filled with laughter and warmth now feels cold, the air heavy with disbelief. I don't turn it off. Not yet. "Rick!" she yells again, her voice breaking. She takes a step toward me, but stops herself, her eyes wide with desperation. This isn't what you think." Her words come fast now, stumbling over each other. It's not what it looks like, I swear. Please, just turn it off, and we'll talk about it." I raise an eyebrow at her. "Not what it looks like?" My voice is calm, too calm. I feel that stillness again, settling over me like a shroud. What part of it isn't what it looks like, Mary? The messages? The secret meetings? Or maybe it's the hotel room. She flinches as if I slapped her. Out of the corner of my eye, I see my nephew, Danny, standing near the door, his face pale. He knew what was coming, but even he didn't expect this. None of them did. You have to believe me, Mary pleads, stepping closer. Her voice has dropped now, quieter, as if trying to control the situation, trying to regain her grip. It's not. It's complicated, Rick. Just stop this. Please. Let's go somewhere and talk. Just the two of us. I can feel the eyes of the family on me, waiting for my reaction. But I'm done. I'm done with talking. 32 years of trust, of loyalty, of building a life together, wiped out with one man's touch. I wonder, briefly, if she even understands what she's done, if she realizes the weight of it. I shake my head. There's nothing left to talk about, Mary. My voice is rough, the anger spilling out now. You've lied to me for months. You've lied to everyone here. Do you think I'm just going to sweep this under the rug? Let you keep pretending? Her face crumbles, and for a second, I see something I haven't seen in months, vulnerability. She reaches out a trembling hand, as if to touch me, to pull me back to her side. But I don't move. You don't understand, she whispers, tears welling up in her eyes now. You don't understand what it's been like. Rick, it's not just. No. I cut her off, my voice firm. I don't think you understand what you've done. And with that, I turn off the TV. The silence that follows is deafening. No one speaks, not even Mary. I can see her family shifting in their seats, uncomfortable, embarrassed for her. For me, no one knows what to say. What do you say after something like that? After you've watched a 32-year marriage crumble right in front of you? I take a deep breath and step forward, facing her directly. You had a choice, Mary, I say quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. You could have come to me. We could have worked through whatever this is. But instead, you lied. You kept lying. She opens her mouth to say something, but I don't let her. I'm done. I can feel the weight of those words as they leave my mouth. Final. Absolute. And as much as I want to walk out of this room and leave her standing there, humiliated and alone, I don't. Not yet. Because there's one last part of this that I need to finish. I turn to face the family, still gathered around the table, watching us like they're stuck in some kind of twisted drama they never signed up for. I'm sorry, I say, my voice breaking the tense silence. I didn't want it to happen like this, but you all needed to know. There's a murmur of agreement from somewhere in the back, but I don't care enough to figure out who it was. My mind is already racing ahead, thinking of what comes next, thinking of how, after tonight, nothing will ever be the same. I glance back at Mary, and for the first time, I see her not as my wife, not as the woman I spent more than 3 decades building a life with, but as someone else entirely. A stranger, someone I don't recognize anymore. And that's when I know what I need to do. I'm leaving, I announce to the room. I'm packing my things tonight. I'm done. I watch as the reality of my words sink in. I see the panic in her eyes, the desperation as she steps forward again, reaching for me, but this time, I don't let her touch me. I step back. Don't, I warn quietly, don't make this worse than it already is. She stops, her hand falling to her side, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of it all has finally crushed her. And then, without another word, I turn and leave the room. The cold night air hits me as soon as I step outside, slamming into me like a wave. For a moment, I just stand there, breathing it in. My hands are shaking, though I don't know if it's from the adrenaline or the raw emotion that's been clawing at me for months. I hear the door creak open behind me, and I already know who it is without turning around. Rick, wait. Mary's voice calls out, strained, almost broken. I stop but don't turn. Not yet. I don't trust myself to look at her without losing whatever grip I still have on myself. I don't want to talk anymore, Mary, I say, keeping my voice as even as I can. We're done. No, we're not, she snaps back. and I hear her steps come closer, the sound of her heels clicking against the driveway. You can't just end it like this. We've been married for 32 years. For God's sake, you can't throw that all away because of one mistake. One mistake. I finally turn, my eyes locking onto hers. You call months of lying and sneaking around one mistake? She flinches, but she doesn't back down. It's not like that, Rick. It wasn't supposed to happen. None of this was supposed to happen. I hold up my hand, cutting her off before she can finish. I don't want to hear the excuses anymore. I've heard them all over and over in my mind for months. Don't, I say, my voice firmer now. Don't insult me by pretending like this was some accident. You didn't just trip and fall into an affair, Mary. Her face tightens, and I see that flash of anger in her eyes again. The same anger she always used when she wanted to manipulate the situation to get the upper hand. I recognize it now for what it is. A tactic. A way to make me feel like I'm the one in the wrong. You don't know what it's been like for me, she snaps, her voice hardening. You think this is all so black and white, but it's not. You've been so distant, Rick. So wrapped up in your own life that you didn't even see me anymore. I was lonely. Stop. I say, louder than I meant to. I feel my anger flare again, the heat of it rising in my chest. Stop blaming me for your choices. I didn't make you cheat. I didn't make you lie to me, to our family. You did that. You. Her eyes well with tears, and for a moment, she looks lost, like she doesn't know how we got here either. But I can't let myself feel sorry for her. Not after everything. Rick, she whispers, her voice cracking. Please don't leave. We can fix this. I'll end it, I swear. I'll do whatever you want. Just, please, don't walk away from us. I almost laugh at the word, the way she says it, like there's still an us to fight for. I feel the sting of it deep in my gut. The part of me that spent decades trying to protect this marriage, trying to believe we were different, that we could weather any storm. But this is something else. This isn't something you just fix with promises and apologies. I can't do this anymore. I say, quieter now, my voice almost a whisper. I don't even know who you are anymore. Her face crumples, and she takes a step toward me, reaching out as if to grab my hand. I take a step back, keeping the distance between us. I can't let her touch me. I can't let her pull me back into her orbit. Not again. I'm going to the cabin, I say, making the decision in that moment. I'll pack a bag, and I'm leaving tonight. I need space. I need time to figure out what the hell I'm going to do. Her tears spill over now, and she covers her face with her hands, shaking her head. No, please don't go. Don't leave me. I'll change. I'll do anything. Just don't leave. I watch her cry, my chest tight, my mind spinning. Part of me wants to believe her. Part of me wants to wrap her in my arms, tell her it's going to be okay, that we'll get through this somehow. But that part of me is small now, almost non-existent. You already left, Mary. I say, my voice barely a whisper now. You left me the second you started seeing him. Her sobs grow louder, and I can't stand it. I can't stand watching her like this. So I turn away, walking back into the house, back into the living room where the family is still gathered in stunned silence. No one says a word as I walk through, heading toward the stairs. I'm halfway up when I hear a voice behind me. Chris, my son. Dad. I stop, my hand on the railing, but I don't turn around. Yeah. Do you need anything? Do you want me to help you pack? I swallow hard, my throat tightening. I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting him to be the one offering. For years now, Chris and I have had a strained relationship. Nothing big, nothing dramatic, just the slow drift that happens between fathers and sons as they get older, as their lives pull them in different directions. But in this moment, his voice is soft, uncertain, but there's something else in it too. Concern, compassion. I turn around, meeting his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I see my son as the man he's become. Strong, capable, and willing to help. To stand by me. I'm all right, son. I manage, my voice thick with emotion. I can handle it. He nods, his face tight, and I see him glance toward his mother, who's still outside, crying by the car. He looks back at me, his eyes searching mine for something. Maybe for the right thing to say, or maybe just trying to figure out how to process what he's just seen. I don't have any answers for him. I'll be at the cabin, I say, clearing my throat. I'll call you tomorrow. We'll talk then. Okay, he says, nodding again, though I can see the uncertainty in his eyes. He doesn't know what's coming next. Hell, neither do I. I pack a bag in under 10 minutes. Just the basics: clothes, toothbrush, razor. As I throw in a sweater, I hear the door creak behind me, and I glance over my shoulder. It's Danny, my nephew. He lingers in the doorway, his face tense, unsure if he should say something or just leave me to it. He rubs the back of his neck, looking a lot younger than his 30-something years in this moment. I'm sorry, Uncle Rick, he says finally, his voice low. I didn't know it was going to get like that. I nod, zipping up my bag. It's not your fault, Danny. You did what I asked. He shifts his weight, his hands jammed into his pockets. Still, if I'd known. He trails off, his eyes filled with regret. I meet his gaze, forcing a small smile. You helped me see the truth. That's all I needed. He doesn't say anything for a moment, then just nods, stepping back out of the room to give me space. I grab my bag and head down the stairs. The living room is still a minefield of awkward silence. Everyone too stunned to move. I don't linger. I walk straight through, ignoring the concerned looks from Mary's side of the family, ignoring the pity in the eyes of mine. I'm halfway to the door when I hear her voice again, soft, almost pleading. Rick, wait. I don't stop, and then I'm gone. The drive to the cabin is longer than I remember. Or maybe it just feels longer because of everything weighing on me. The roads are dark, winding through the thick forest, and the further I get from the house, the heavier the silence becomes. I roll down the window, letting the cool air hit my face, trying to clear my head, but the memories keep flashing in front of me. Her face when I confronted her, the messages on the screen, the way the family sat there, paralyzed, watching everything fall apart. I pull into the long gravel driveway of the cabin, the headlights cutting through the darkness. The place has always been a refuge for me, a little slice of peace away from the noise of the world. But tonight it feels different, lonelier. I park the car and sit there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The trees sway gently in the breeze. The night so quiet it feels like the whole world is holding its breath. Finally, I get out, grab my bag, and walk up to the door. The cabin creaks as I open it, the familiar smell of wood and pine filling my lungs. I drop the bag on the floor and collapse onto the couch, my body heavy with exhaustion. For the first time in months, I'm alone. No more pretending, no more lies, just me, and the silence. I woke up at some point in the middle of the night, disoriented and heavy, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a fog. Took a moment to remember where I was. The cabin was dark except for the faint moonlight streaming through the windows. The clock on the wall said it was just after 2 a.m. I sat up slowly, my back aching from having slept in an awkward position on the couch. The fire in the hearth had long since died out, leaving only cold ashes. Rubbing my face, I tried to shake off the dream, no, the nightmare I'd been trapped in. In it, I'd been chasing Mary through the house, but every time I got close, she would vanish, only to reappear somewhere else, laughing, just out of reach. When I finally caught up to her, she turned, and it wasn't her face anymore. It was his, whoever he was. I got up, my joints stiff, and shuffled to the kitchen to get some water. The floor creaked underfoot, the familiar sound somehow comforting. I'd spent so many summers here with the kids when they were little, fishing off the dock, grilling burgers on the back porch. Even now, I could see the faded marks where we'd measured Chris's and Sarah's heights against the pantry door. A lifetime ago. Leaning against the counter, I took a long drink of water and stared out the window into the dark. The trees outside were tall and imposing, swaying gently in the breeze. The silence of the forest used to soothe me, but tonight, it felt too quiet, too empty. I was used to having her here with me, filling the spaces with her voice, her laugh, even just her presence. Now it felt like I was floating in a void, cut loose from the anchor that had been my life for so long. I set the glass down and walked back to the living room, but I didn't sit, couldn't. My mind was racing too fast to settle back down. Instead, I grabbed my coat, threw it on, and headed out the door. The crisp fall air hit me again, but this time, it woke me up, cleared my head a little. I walked down the path toward the lake, my boots crunching over the gravel. The moon was high now, reflecting off the water like a giant spotlight. The cabin was far enough from town that the sky was clear, filled with stars, and for a moment, I just stood there, looking out at the stillness of the lake, the black water stretching out like an endless void. What the hell had happened to my life? For 32 years, I thought I had it figured out. Mary and I had built something together. We had our ups and downs, sure, what marriage didn't? But I never thought we'd end up here, with me standing alone in the middle of the night, wondering if any of it had been real. I found myself thinking back to when we first met. I was 23, fresh out of college, and she was this bright, beautiful woman who seemed to light up every room she walked into. I remember how we stayed up all night talking, how easy it was back then. We had nothing, but it didn't matter. We had each other, or at least I thought we did. I don't know when things started to shift. Maybe it was after the kids left the house. Maybe it was when my job got more demanding, and I wasn't around as much. Maybe it was 1,000 little things that added up over time, the way they do in life. But I'd never expected her to. I never expected this. I reached the dock and sat down on the edge, the wood creaking beneath me. The water lapped gently at the posts, a soft rhythm that matched the pounding in my chest. I pulled out my phone and stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to call her, to hear her voice, to tell her how much she had wrecked me. But what was the point? What would I even say that hadn't already been said? Instead, I found myself scrolling through the messages, the ones Danny had pulled from her phone. There were dozens of them, some casual, some intimate, some that made my stomach turn with rage. Can't stop thinking about you. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening on the phone until my knuckles were white. How long had she been planning this? How long had she been smiling at me across the dinner table, knowing full well she was betraying me? Was I just convenient? Was I the safety net while she had her fun? And who the hell was he? I hadn't let myself dwell on that question much yet. But now, sitting here alone by the lake, it gnawed at me. There was a name in the messages, Steve. No last name, no details about who he was or how they met. Just Steve. The man who had somehow wormed his way into my life and stolen my wife right out from under me. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't help it. I needed to know more. I needed to put a face to the name, to the man who had ripped my world apart. And so, against my better judgment, I opened up my laptop. The cabin's Wi-Fi was spotty, but after a few minutes of searching, I found what I was looking for. Steve was a coworker, of course. They'd worked together on some projects for the last year. I saw his face, smug and grinning in some company newsletter photo. Tall, good-looking in that generic way. I stared at the screen, feeling the anger bubble up again, hotter this time. He was probably younger than me, too. Maybe that's what she wanted. Someone who made her feel young again. I clicked through more photos, more details, but it was all superficial. No answers to the questions that were burning inside me. I closed the laptop with a snap and sat back, my hands shaking with the rage I was barely keeping in check. I wanted to confront him, to find this Steve and make him feel the pain I was drowning in. But then what? What would that solve? I took a deep breath, trying to calm the fire inside. This wasn't me. I wasn't the kind of man who went looking for revenge. I wasn't the kind of man who let his life spiral out of control. But right now, it felt like I was slipping into something darker, something I didn't recognize. The lake stretched out before me, dark and endless, and I felt that same darkness inside of me, pulling at me, threatening to drag me under. Hours passed. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring at the water. The sky started to lighten. the first hints of dawn creeping up over the horizon. I was exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally. My thoughts felt like they'd been spinning in circles all night, going nowhere, offering no answers. But one thing had become clear in the quiet of the night. I couldn't just sit here wallowing in this. I couldn't let Mary's betrayal be the thing that defined me, that broke me. I had to take control of this situation, even if it meant doing something I never thought I'd do. I stood up, feeling the stiffness in my legs, and made my way back up to the cabin. Inside, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, staring out the window as the sun slowly started to rise. I knew what I had to do next. By the time I got back to the house later that morning, the family had already cleared out. The remnants of last night's dinner were still there, the plates stacked up in the sink, the half-empty wine glasses scattered around the living room. Felt like a crime scene, and in a way it was. Mary was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She didn't look up when I walked in. I set my bag down and took a seat across from her. The silence stretched out between us, thick and suffocating. For a moment, I thought she wasn't going to say anything. But then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "I'm sorry, Rick. I really am. I didn't say anything. I just waited. I never wanted to hurt you," she continued, her hands wringing the edge of her sweater. "I don't know how it got so out of control. I don't know how we got here." I stared at her, feeling the weight of her words, but they didn't land the way they used to. There was no comfort in them, no meaning. "I don't either," I said quietly. Her eyes filled with tears again, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of the old instinct, the one that wanted to comfort her, to take away her pain. But I crushed it. I couldn't be that man anymore. Not for her. "I've been thinking," I said, my voice steady. "We're going to sell the house." She looked up at me, startled. "What?" "I'm done," I said, my voice growing firmer. "I can't keep living like this. We'll sell the house, split everything, and move on." She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like she didn't know how to respond. But we can fix this, Rick. We can." "No, Mary." I cut her off, my voice cold. "We can't. There's nothing left to fix." And for the first time, I saw it in her eyes. The realization, the understanding that this was the end. I stood up, pushing my chair back, and grabbed my bag. "I'll be in touch with the lawyer," I said, heading for the door. "But for now, I'm going back to the cabin. I need space. I need time." She didn't say anything as I walked out the door, the finality of it hanging in the air behind me. I pulled away from the house without looking back. The driveway, the front yard, the tree where we hung the swing for the kids when they were young. It all felt distant, like a fading photograph from another life. The road stretched out in front of me, empty and quiet, as if it too was ready for me to leave the past behind. The decision had come easily once I'd faced it in the cold light of the early morning. Mary's betrayal had shattered something inside me, something that couldn't be pieced back together. There was no going back to what we were. Hell, there wasn't even any sense in pretending we could. Not anymore. As I drove, my phone buzzed in the passenger seat. I didn't need to look to know it was her. She'd probably try to call 100 times. Maybe she'd send messages too, promises of change, of working things out. But I knew those were just words. She was grasping at the last threads of something she'd already unraveled herself. I let the phone buzz, ignoring it. Nothing she said now could make a difference. The drive back to the cabin felt shorter this time, like I was being drawn there, to the only place where I could think clearly, where I could finally figure out what my next step would be. When I got there, the air was still cold, but the sun was shining through the trees now, casting long shadows across the gravel driveway. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, staring at the cabin. It was just as I'd left it, the wooden front porch creaking in the breeze, the smell of pine and earth all around me. It was peaceful, quiet, the kind of place where you could sit and think. And I needed to think. I stepped out of the car and headed inside, dropping my bag near the door. As soon as I sat down on the couch, the exhaustion hit me all at once. My mind, my body, everything felt heavy, like I'd been running on fumes for days. Maybe I had been. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a minute, but sleep didn't come. My thoughts were too loud, too tangled. What had happened between Mary and me was playing on a loop in my head. The lies, the betrayal, the confrontation. It felt like I was watching my life collapse in slow motion. The house, the divorce, splitting 32 years of marriage into pieces. It seemed impossible. How do you take a life you've built together and cut it in half? Who gets what? Who gets the memories? The laughter? The late-night talks and the family vacations? Who gets to keep all of that? I knew it was just things, material objects that could be sold or divided. But the weight of it all sat heavy on my chest. Because it wasn't just things we'd built together. It was a life, family. And now I was going to dismantle it piece by piece, every memory, every shared moment, all of it reduced to cold legal terms. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to clear my head. I wasn't ready to deal with the logistics yet. I wasn't ready to think about lawyers and property and paperwork. I needed something else to focus on, something I could control. That's when the anger started bubbling up again. The thoughts I'd tried to push away in the quiet hours of the morning came back with force. Steve, the man Mary had thrown everything away for. Who the hell was this guy? What made him so important that she was willing to risk everything? Did he know about me? About our family? Did he even care? I didn't want to care. I didn't want to think about him, about what they'd done together. But the images kept coming. The messages, the photos. Her smile, his hand on hers. I felt sick just thinking about it, but I couldn't stop. I had to know more. Grabbing my phone, I opened it and scrolled through the messages again, the ones Danny had pulled. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. They'd made plans for the next weekend. A hotel in the city. The same place they'd met before. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the message. It was like a doorway had opened, and I was standing on the edge of something dangerous. Something I couldn't come back from. I knew what I was thinking wasn't smart. I knew it could blow up in my face. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I wasn't just going to let her walk away from this. I wasn't going to let him walk away from this. Before I knew it, I was grabbing my keys again, heading out the door and back to the car. The cold air bit at my skin, but I barely felt it. My mind was racing, fueled by a single thought. I needed to see him. I needed to look him in the eye. I needed to understand why this had happened. I checked his work schedule earlier. He'd be at the office today just like every other weekday. I knew where it was. A corporate office downtown. Nothing fancy. Just another glass building in the middle of the city. I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I got there, but I couldn't stop myself. The drive felt long. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, my knuckles white with tension. I could feel the heat building inside me, the need for answers, for some kind of closure, or maybe just for revenge. But by the time I pulled into the parking garage near his office, I still didn't know what my next move would be. I sat in the car for a moment, trying to calm my breathing. I didn't even know what he looked like. Not really. Sure, I'd seen his face in the photos, but they didn't give me the full picture. I couldn't match the smirking man in those grainy photos to the one who had ripped apart my life. I had to see him in person. I had to confront him. I stepped out of the car, my legs shaky as I made my way into the building. It was a quiet morning. Most people were already at work, their heads buried in computers, their lives moving along without a second thought to the chaos swirling in mine. I didn't know what I was going to say. I wasn't even sure I'd make it all the way to his office. But the closer I got, the more determined I felt. I needed this. I needed to see him face to face. When I reached the floor where his office was located, my pulse was pounding in my ears. I walked down the hallway, scanning the names on the doors, until I saw it. Steve Hardwick. The name was simple, unremarkable, but to me it was the name of the man who had ruined everything. I stood there for a moment, just staring at the door, the weight of what I was about to do sinking in. What was my plan here? To confront him? To get him to admit everything? To see the guilt in his eyes? Or was I just looking for a fight? A release for all the anger that had been building inside me for months? Before I could think too much about it, I knocked. There was a pause. Then, from the other side of the door, I heard footsteps. The door opened slowly, and there he was, Steve. He was younger than me, probably by a decade or more. Tall, fit, wearing a crisp white shirt and slacks. His hair was neatly combed, and there was a faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. He looked like any other office worker, a little too polished, a little too perfect. For a moment, he didn't recognize me. He just stood there, frowning slightly, like he was trying to place where he'd seen me before. And then it clicked. His eyes widened, and he took a step back, his hand gripping the edge of the door. "Rick," he said, his voice uncertain. What are you doing here?" For a second, I just stared at him, my fists clenched at my sides. I didn't know what I expected, but it sure as hell wasn't this. The man standing in front of me didn't look like the smug, confident guy from the photos. He looked scared, nervous. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I said, my voice low but steady. He didn't answer right away. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting down the hallway as if checking to see if anyone else was around. He started, but his voice faltered. He seemed to gather himself, straightening up a little. "Look, Rick, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It just happened?" I snapped, cutting him off. "Is that what you're going to say? That it just happened?" He winced, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't plan for this. I didn't mean for it to get this far." I laughed, a short, bitter sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. "Didn't mean for it to get this far? How far did you mean for it to go, Steve? You've been screwing my wife behind my back for months. What the hell did you think was going to happen?" His face paled, and for a moment he looked like he might pass out. Good. Let him feel what I was feeling. Let him feel the weight of what he'd done. I didn't know she was going to leave you," he said weakly, his voice barely above a whisper now. I thought she was unhappy that you two were, I don't know, drifting apart." My blood boiled. Drifting apart? How dare he pretend to know anything about my marriage? How dare he try to justify what he'd done by making it seem like it was somehow my fault? I stepped closer, my voice lowering to a dangerous level. "She wasn't unhappy. We weren't drifting apart, Steve. You didn't take advantage of some broken marriage. You broke it." He stared at me, speechless. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He didn't have anything to say. He didn't have an excuse that would make this better. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the fire inside me died out. I felt drained, hollowed out. I wasn't going to get the satisfaction I was looking for. This man, this pathetic excuse for a man, wasn't worth it. He wasn't worth my time, my anger. I stepped back, shaking my head. "You're not the reason she cheated," I said, my voice quieter now. "You're just a symptom." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving Steve standing there in the doorway, pale and shaken, like a man who had just seen his own grave. As I walked back through the office building, the adrenaline that had driven me there began to fade, leaving me feeling strangely empty. What had I really expected to accomplish with that confrontation? Steve wasn't some larger-than-life villain. He was just weak. A weak man who took what wasn't his. A coward. It wasn't even about him anymore. It wasn't about revenge. It was about something deeper. The truth was, Steve hadn't broken my marriage. Mary had. And for the first time, I was starting to come to terms with that. When I got to the parking garage, I leaned against the car for a moment, just breathing in the cool air, trying to clear my head. The city around me buzzed with life. People walking by, heading to their offices or grabbing coffee, completely unaware of the storm I'd been caught in. It was surreal. My world was falling apart, and yet life kept going, indifferent, as if nothing had happened. I finally got into the car and sat there for a while, staring blankly at the dashboard. The cabin felt miles away, and I wasn't ready to go back there just yet. There was too much noise in my head, too much left to process. What now? What comes next when everything you thought you knew is gone? I drove aimlessly for a while, the roads blurring together as I tried to make sense of the mess my life had become. I didn't know where I was going, But I didn't care. I just needed to keep moving, to feel like I was doing something, anything, instead of being swallowed up by the weight of it all. I found myself pulling into a diner on the edge of town, a small, nondescript place with a neon sign flickering in the window. It was the kind of spot that probably hadn't changed in decades. Inside, it smelled like bacon grease and old coffee, the booths lined with faded red leather. I used to come to places like this when I was younger, back when life felt simpler, back when Mary and I would go on road trips together, stopping at little diners like this to grab a bite before heading back on the road. I sat down in a booth near the window, staring out at the parking lot. The waitress came over, an older woman, probably in her late 50s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. She reminded me of someone I couldn't quite place. "What can I get you, Han?" she asked, her voice friendly but distant, like she'd been through this routine 1,000 times before. "Just coffee," I said, my voice sounding rough in my own ears. I wasn't really hungry. I just needed a place to sit and think, to figure out what came next. She nodded and disappeared behind the counter, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I ran a hand over my face, feeling the stubble that had grown in over the last few days. I was exhausted, but it wasn't just physical. It was deeper than that. I was tired in my bones, in my soul, as if I'd been carrying the weight of this for far too long. The coffee arrived, and I wrapped my hands around the mug, the warmth spreading through my fingers. I didn't even take a sip. I just sat there, staring down at the dark liquid, my mind drifting back to the confrontation with Steve. I didn't regret going to see him. I'd needed to see the kind of man he was, needed to look him in the eye and understand why this had happened. But what had really struck me, what had left a deeper scar, was the realization that it wasn't about Steve at all. It was about Mary. It had always been about her. What kind of person betrays 32 years of marriage? What kind of person looks into your eyes, shares a home with you, a life with you, and still makes the decision to throw it all away? I thought about the promises we made, back when we were young and naive, when the idea of forever seemed like something we could reach out and hold. I thought about the kids, about the years we'd spent raising them, working late nights to pay off the mortgage, planning for retirement. All of it felt like it had been built on a lie now, like I'd been living in a house of cards, and one gust of wind had blown it all down. I'd never questioned her loyalty, not once in 32 years. Sure, there had been hard times, every marriage has them, but I'd always thought we were solid. I thought we were one of the lucky ones, the couples who made it through to the other side, still together, still strong. But now I didn't even know what was real. My phone buzzed on the table, and I glanced down. Another missed call from Mary. The notification blinked at me, her name still lighting up the screen. I stared at it for a long time, the urge to answer warring with the anger that had been burning in me since this all started. I didn't answer, couldn't. What was there left to say? I took a deep breath and pushed the phone away, letting it slide across the table. I couldn't talk to her yet. I wasn't ready to hear her voice, to hear the same tired apologies, the same promises to change. We were past that. We were way past that. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed closure. I needed something more than just walking away from 32 years of my life and pretending it never happened. I needed to understand why. I leaned back in the booth, staring out the window again. The world outside seemed so damn ordinary. The waitress was taking an order from a couple a few booths down, their laughter echoing faintly in the background. A group of teenagers walked by the diner, their faces glowing under the neon lights, carefree and oblivious to the kind of pain that only comes with age and experience. For a moment, I envied them. I envied their ignorance. They didn't know what it was like to lose everything, to have the ground ripped out from under them and be left standing in the wreckage of a life they thought they knew. But then I shook my head. No, they'd get there eventually. Life had a way of teaching everyone those hard lessons. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday they'd understand. Just like I had. The waitress came by again, refilling my coffee without a word. She glanced at me, her eyes soft, as if she could sense the weight I was carrying. Maybe she'd seen it before. Maybe she'd lived it herself. I sat there for a long time, the coffee going cold in front of me, my mind running in circles. Eventually, I'd have to talk to Mary. We'd have to deal with the house, the finances, the future. But right now, I wasn't ready for that conversation. I wasn't ready to let go of the anger that was still coursing through me, keeping me on edge. When I finally left the diner, the sun was starting to set, casting a warm, orange glow over the parking lot. I stood by the car for a minute, watching the sky shift colors, trying to figure out my next move. I could go back to the cabin, sit in the quiet, think some more. Or I could go back home, face the mess head-on, deal with Mary and everything that came with her. But then, another thought crept in. One I hadn't really considered until now. Maybe I didn't need to deal with any of it. Maybe I didn't need to fix anything. Maybe I could just walk away. The idea took root in my mind, growing slowly as I turned it over in my head. I'd spent my whole life taking care of other people. My family, my kids, even Mary. But now it felt like I'd been left with nothing. What if I just left? What if I packed up what little I had left and disappeared? No more drama. No more betrayal. Just freedom. The idea felt like a lifeline, something I could hold onto in the middle of this storm. But as tempting as it was, I knew it wasn't that simple. Life wasn't something you could just walk away from. There were consequences. There were always consequences. I got back in the car and sat there, gripping the steering wheel. The cabin seemed like a distant memory now. Going back there would just be another reminder of everything I was trying to escape. So I started the car and made a choice. Instead of heading back to the cabin, I drove toward the coast, toward the ocean, where the waves could drown out the noise in my head. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving forward. Away from the past, away from Mary, toward something new. The drive to the coast stretched out in front of me like a promise. I hadn't been there in years, not since the kids were young. Back then, we'd take family trips to the shore, renting a beach house for a week. Mary loved it. The ocean, the sand between her toes, the salt air. We'd take long walks along the water in the evenings, watching the sun sink below the horizon. And for a while, it felt like those moments were enough to carry us through the years. But those days were gone now. They felt like a distant dream, and I wasn't going back there for the memories. I was going there to get away. I needed the ocean to drown out everything that had been dragging me down. Maybe I thought the open water would wash it all away, leave me feeling lighter. By the time I reached the coast, the sun was setting. The sky blazed with colors, deep oranges and purples streaking across the horizon, like the earth was on fire. The sea was calm, the waves gently lapping against the shore. It was quiet, peaceful. I parked near an old pier, where a handful of tourists and locals were milling about, snapping photos of the sunset or walking hand in hand along the beach. They didn't pay me any mind. I was just another man passing through, blending into the background. That's what I wanted. I grabbed my jacket and headed down to the sand, the cool breeze from the ocean brushing against my face. It was late October, the beach mostly empty now that the summer season had long since ended. I liked it that way. I wanted the solitude, the space to think. As I walked along the shore, my thoughts started to settle, the crashing of the waves in rhythm with the pounding in my head. The anger that had been burning inside me for so long began to fade, replaced by something else. An emptiness, a hollow feeling that settled in my chest like a stone. I kept thinking about what Mary had said, her apologies, her desperate attempts to explain herself. But none of it made sense to me. How do you spend 32 years with someone and then betray them like that? How do you look them in the eyes every day, pretending everything is fine while you're living a lie? I stopped walking, staring out at the water. It stretched out endlessly, dark and vast, swallowing the last bits of sunlight as the sky faded to a deep, inky blue. For a moment, I let the thought cross my mind. What if I just kept walking, kept going until the water pulled me under, until there was nothing left of the life I'd known? But I shook the thought away. No, that wasn't the answer. I wasn't going to let this break me. I wasn't going to let her win, wasn't going to let her destroy the rest of my life because of her choices. I'd given too much of myself to her already. She didn't get to take anything more. I found a spot near the pier and sat down in the sand. My knees pulled up to my chest. The sound of the waves filled my ears, and for the first time in a long time, I felt still. The chaos, the noise, it was all starting to quiet down. Maybe it was the ocean. Maybe it was the distance from everything. Or maybe I was just finally letting go of the weight I'd been carrying for so long. The moon had risen by now, casting a pale light over the water, making it shimmer like silver. I stared at it, letting my mind drift, wondering where I'd go from here. How do you rebuild a life after something like this? How do you start over when the person you trusted most in the world is the one who betrayed you? I didn't have the answers. Not yet. But sitting there, in the quiet of the night, I realized something. I didn't need to have the answers right now. It was okay to not know. It was okay to be lost for a while. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, but eventually, the cold started to seep into my bones, and I knew it was time to head back. I got up, dusted the sand off my pants, and walked back to the car. The drive to the coast had given me space to breathe, to think, but now I needed to figure out what came next. I wasn't ready to face Mary again. I wasn't ready to deal with the house or the lawyers or any of the mess waiting for me back home. But I couldn't keep running away forever. I knew that much. I drove through the night, the empty highway stretching out in front of me, the radio playing low in the background. I thought about my kids, Chris and Sarah. I hadn't told them the whole story yet. They knew something was wrong, but I hadn't given them the details. How do you explain something like this to your children? How do you tell them that the mother they've loved and looked up to for their entire lives wasn't the person they thought she was? But they had a right to know. They needed to understand why everything was falling apart. And as much as it hurt to admit it, they needed to know who their mother really was. I decided I'd call them in the morning. Maybe I'd go see them. I wasn't sure how they'd take it, but I couldn't keep hiding from this. If I was going to move forward, I had to face it head on. The thought of seeing them again gave me some small measure of comfort. At least they were still there. At least I hadn't lost them. The next morning, I woke up back at the cabin. The sun was shining through the windows, and for the first time in days, I felt a little more like myself. I made some coffee, sat on the porch, and watched the trees sway in the breeze. It was quiet, peaceful. The kind of morning where you almost believe everything might just be okay again. I picked up my phone and dialed Chris's number. He answered on the second ring. "Dad." "Hey, Chris," I said, my voice steady. "I was hoping we could talk." There was a pause on the other end. "Yeah, of course. Are you okay?" "I'm getting there," I said, staring out at the trees. "I'm going to head over later today. There's some things I need to explain." "Okay," he said, his voice filled with concern. "Do you want me to come to you instead?" "No," I said quickly. "No, I'll come to you. It's better that way." "All right, Dad," he said. "We'll be here." I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, letting the reality of the conversation sink in. I was about to tell my son that his mother had betrayed us, that she wasn't the person he thought she was. It felt like ripping open a wound that was already raw, but it had to be done. I had to start being honest, not just with him, but with myself. I spent the rest of the morning packing up the cabin, knowing I wouldn't be back here for a while. The cabin had always been my refuge, but now it felt like a place where I'd come to escape the truth. And I wasn't running anymore. By the time I got to Chris's house, the sun was high in the sky. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind with kids playing in the yards and cars parked in neat rows along the street. I hadn't been over here much lately. Life had gotten in the way, and I'd let the distance between us grow without meaning to. Chris opened the door before I could knock. He looked tired, his face drawn, like he hadn't slept well in days. He gave me a small, hesitant smile. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, kiddo," I said, giving him a quick hug. It felt good to hold him, even for just a second. A reminder that some things hadn't changed. "Come on in," he said, stepping aside to let me in. We sat down in the living room, the silence between us heavy, like we both knew what was coming but didn't want to face it just yet. "How are you doing?" Chris asked, breaking the silence. You've been at the cabin, right? Yeah, I said, nodding. Needed some space to think. He looked down at his hands, twisting them together like he was bracing himself for something. I know things have been rough, Dad, but I didn't want to push you if you weren't ready to talk. I sighed, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I'm ready now, Chris, but it's not easy to say. Things between your mom and me, they're not going to get better. Not this time. He looked up, frowning. I figured, but what happened? I mean, I know something went down, but you haven't told me anything. I took a deep breath. Your mother. She's been having an affair. His face fell, the color draining from it as the words sunk in. What? I nodded, feeling the weight of it all over again. For months. I found out a while ago. Tried to confront her, but, well, you know your mother. She's good at hiding things. Chris sat back, his face a mix of shock and anger. I can't believe it. I never thought she'd do something like this. Neither did I said quietly. But here we are. He didn't say anything for a long time. We just sat there, the silence thick and heavy between us. Finally, he spoke. What are you going to do? I'm divorcing her, I said simply. There's no fixing this. I can't live with someone who would betray me like that. Chris nodded slowly, still processing. I understand. I looked at him, my chest tightening. I didn't want to drag you into this, Chris. I know it's hard to hear, but you deserve to know the truth. He leaned forward, resting his hand on mine. You didn't drag me into anything, Dad. I'm glad you told me. We sat there for a long time, not saying much, but understanding each other in the way only family can. It wasn't the conversation I wanted to have, but it was the one I needed. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. Chris and I sat in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation still lingering in the room. The betrayal had stretched its reach far beyond just Mary and me. It had cast a shadow over everything, even the bond one had with my son. But as we sat there, I realized that, for the first time, I wasn't drowning in it. I wasn't alone. Chris cleared his throat after a few minutes. Have you told Sarah yet? I shook my head. Not yet. I didn't want to do it over the phone. I'll go see her in person. He nodded, his jaw tight. She'll take it hard. Yeah, I said, running a hand through my hair. I know. Sarah had always been close with her mother. Even as a little girl, she'd followed Mary around like a shadow, soaking up every word, every habit. How would she react when she learned her mother had been living a lie? I don't want this to come between you and her, I added quietly. Between you and your mom, I mean. Chris looked at me, his expression unreadable. Dad, that's not on you. I'll figure it out. I nodded, not sure what else to say. I had no idea how any of this was going to play out. I didn't know how long the shock and anger would last or if Sarah and Chris would find a way to navigate their relationship with Mary. I didn't know what my own relationship with her would look like once the dust settled. But I couldn't think that far ahead. Not yet. Chris stood up, stretching a little, the tension in his body visible. You staying here tonight? I shook my head. No, I'm heading back to the cabin. I've got some things I need to sort out. All right, he said, nodding. But if you need anything, call. Doesn't matter what time it is. I will, I said, grateful for his support. It wasn't an easy thing to offer when your family is falling apart. But Chris had always been solid. He wasn't the kind to crumble under pressure. As I got ready to leave, he walked me to the door. The late afternoon light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows on the floor. You'll talk to Sarah soon? Tomorrow, I said, knowing I couldn't put it off much longer. I'll go over to see her tomorrow. He gave me a quick nod, then pulled me into a hug. Take care of yourself, Dad. You too, son. I left Chris's house feeling lighter, but not free. The weight of everything was still there, pressing down on me, but having shared the truth with my son had eased some of the burden. It was a start. By the time I got back to the cabin, the sun was setting again. It was quiet as I stepped out of the car, the air cool and still. The trees around the cabin stood tall and dark, casting long shadows over the gravel driveway. I paused for a moment, just listening. The wind rustled through the branches, and I could hear the faint sound of the lake in the distance, lapping gently against the shore. For all the noise that had been filling my head these past few weeks, this place still managed to calm me. It reminded me that there was more to life than the mess I'd been tangled in. I headed inside, dropping my keys on the table and pouring myself a glass of whiskey. It had been a long day, and I needed something to take the edge off. I sat down by the fireplace, staring into the empty hearth, my mind still spinning. Tomorrow I'd see Sarah, and I wasn't sure how I was going to break the news to her. She'd idolized her mother in a way Chris never had. Where Chris had always been practical, keeping an emotional distance from things, Sarah had inherited Mary's spirit. The thought of seeing the look on her face when I told her the truth made me sick. But it had to be done. There was no way around it. I took a sip of the whiskey, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, and leaned back in the chair. The firewood sat in the hearth, untouched since the last time I was here. I should have gotten up to light it, but I didn't have the energy. Instead, I let my thoughts drift back to the confrontation with Steve. I hadn't seen it then, but now, in the quiet of the cabin, I realized something. Standing there in his office, looking at him nervous, weak, I'd seen what Mary must have seen in him. He was the opposite of me in every way. He wasn't confident or strong. He was malleable, someone she could manipulate. Maybe that's why she'd chosen him. Maybe she needed someone she could control because she'd lost that with me. But it didn't make it any easier to swallow. I finished the whiskey and set the glass down on the table. My mind was still racing, but my body was starting to give in to the exhaustion. It had been too many sleepless nights, too much weight on my shoulders. I needed rest, but more than that, I needed a plan. I couldn't spend the rest of my life running from this. From her. From the memories of what we'd built together, only to have it torn apart by her choices. I needed to figure out how to rebuild, how to start over. But for now, I needed sleep. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside the window. The sunlight was spilling in through the curtains, painting the room in soft, golden light. For a moment, I forgot where I was. I forgot everything that had happened. It was peaceful, quiet, the kind of morning where you could almost believe things were normal. But then it all came rushing back. The affair, the lies, the weight of it all pressing down on me again. I sat up slowly, rubbing my face. There was no avoiding it today. I had to see Sarah. I had to tell her the truth. I took my time getting ready, trying to mentally prepare myself for the conversation. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. She'd cry, she'd be angry, and she'd probably hate me for a while. But it had to be done. There was no way around it. By the time I got to Sarah's house, it was mid-morning. The sun was high in the sky, and there was a slight breeze blowing through the trees. Her house was a small, cozy place on the outskirts of town, with a picket fence and a well-kept garden in the front yard. She and her husband, Mark, had built a life here. A good one. They just had their second child a few months ago, a baby boy named Ethan. I stood on the porch for a moment, taking a deep breath before I knocked on the door. I wasn't ready, but I didn't have a choice. The door opened, and there she was, my daughter. She looked like Mary when we first met, bright-eyed, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, a smile that could light up a room. But as soon as she saw me, her smile faded, replaced by concern. "Dad? What are you doing here?" she asked, stepping aside to let me in. "I need to talk to you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's important." She frowned but nodded, leading me into the living room. "Is everything okay?" I sat down on the couch, my heart pounding in my chest. "No, Sarah, it's not." She sat across from me, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes wide with worry. "What's going on? Is it Mom?" I nodded slowly, feeling the lump in my throat rise. "Your mother. She's been having an affair." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight, and for a moment, she didn't react. She just stared at me, her eyes searching mine, trying to understand. "What?" she finally whispered, her voice shaking. "She's been seeing someone else for months," I said, my voice cracking. I found out a while ago, but I didn't want to believe it. Sarah's face crumpled, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. No, that can't be right. Mom wouldn't. She wouldn't do that. I didn't think so either, I said, my own voice breaking. But it's true. I've seen the messages, the pictures. There's no denying it. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head, refusing to believe it. How could she do this? How could she do this to you? To us? I don't know, I said, my own eyes stinging with tears. I don't know why she did it, but she did. For a long time we sat there in silence, the weight of the truth pressing down on us. Sarah sobbed quietly, her hands shaking as she wiped at her eyes. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to comfort her because I didn't have the answers myself. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. What are you going to do? I'm divorcing her, I said simply. I can't stay with someone who would do this. She nodded, her face pale. I understand. I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry you have to go through this. She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry too, Dad. We sat together for a long time, just holding on to each other, trying to make sense of a world that no longer made sense. The weight of that moment lingered between Sarah and me, sitting in her living room. The silence was thick, punctuated only by the occasional sniffle as she wiped away tears. I hadn't seen her like this since she was a child. So vulnerable, so lost. And as much as I wanted to, I couldn't fix this for her. Couldn't make it right. Does Chris know? She asked, her voice small, like she was afraid of the answer. Yeah, I said quietly, nodding. I told him yesterday. She nodded slowly, staring down at her hands. And what about the kids? Are you going to tell them? Her question caught me off guard. I hadn't even considered what would come next, hadn't thought about how my grandkids, her kids, would process something like this, if they even needed to know at all. Not yet, I said, clearing my throat. I think that's up to you. They're still young. I don't want them to be caught in the middle of this. She nodded again, but this time more slowly, as if she was still trying to wrap her head around it. Her husband, Mark, was out with the kids, giving us space to talk. I wondered how much he knew, if she had already shared her suspicions with him. Sarah's voice wavered, and I could tell she was holding back a fresh wave of tears. I don't know how to look at her now. I don't even want to see her. Hearing those words from my daughter hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized that my pain had extended so far, that it wasn't just me that Mary had betrayed, but all of us, our whole family. My kids were now reeling from the aftermath, too. It was like a ripple effect, each person touched by her choices in their own way. I know, I said softly, trying to find the right words. I don't know how to face her either. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, the seconds dragging on as we both sat there, lost in our own thoughts. After what felt like an eternity, Sarah wiped her eyes and took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. What now, Dad? She asked, looking at me with an expression that was equal parts helplessness and determination. What happens next? I had been asking myself the same question for days. What now? The divorce was inevitable. There was no way I could stay with Mary after this. But even beyond that, there was the question of how I would move forward. What did life look like after 32 years of marriage crumbled into dust? I don't know, I admitted. I guess we take it one step at a time. The house needs to be sold. We'll have to split everything. There's going to be lawyers involved. The mention of lawyers made Sarah wince. This feels so surreal. I never thought we'd be having this conversation. Neither did I said, the bitterness creeping into my voice despite my best efforts to keep it out. But here we are. She fell silent again, her eyes distant. I could tell she was thinking about her mother, trying to reconcile the woman she had loved and admired her entire life with the woman who had done this. I didn't envy her. I was still struggling with the same thoughts. After a long while, she spoke again. I don't want to take sides, Dad, she said hesitantly. But I don't know how to be around her right now. I'm not asking you to choose sides. I said quickly. You're her daughter. I'm your father. That's not going to change, no matter what happens between me and her. But it does change things, she said, her voice rising with emotion. How am I supposed to have a relationship with her after this? How am I supposed to look her in the eye? I didn't have an answer for her. I didn't know how she was supposed to move forward with Mary, or if it was even possible. All I knew was that she would have to figure that out on her own, just like I was. I'm sorry, Sarah, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I wish I could give you a better answer, but I don't know either. We do the best we can. She nodded, blinking back tears again. I'm glad you told me, though. I'm glad you didn't keep it from us. I couldn't do that, I said. You both deserved to know the truth. After a while, Sarah stood up, smoothing her hands over her jeans as if trying to collect herself. I need to be alone for a little bit, she said softly. I need to think. I nodded, standing up with her. I'll leave you to it. She walked me to the door, and as I stepped outside, the crisp fall air hit me. It felt colder now, like winter was just around the corner, waiting to settle in. I turned to look at her one last time, standing there in the doorway, her face a mix of sadness and confusion. I love you, Sarah, I said. I love you too, Dad, she replied, her voice cracking. We'll get through this. I don't know how yet, but we will. I gave her a small, sad smile and headed back to the car, the weight of the conversation still heavy on my shoulders. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were going to get a lot worse before they got better. The divorce, the selling of the house, the splitting of a life we'd built together. It was all looming over me, waiting to crash down like a tidal wave. And through it all, there was the ever-present question. What would happen with Mary? Would I ever be able to face her again without feeling that sickening churn of betrayal in my gut? Would I be able to sit across from her in a lawyer's office, dividing up our assets like we were nothing more than business partners parting ways? I didn't know, and that scared me more than anything. I spent the next few days back at the cabin, trying to clear my head and figure out my next steps. The quiet of the woods helped, but only so much. I found myself replaying every moment, every decision, trying to find where it had all gone wrong. Had I missed something? Could I have done something differently? But the answers didn't come. All I had was the cold reality of the situation. My marriage was over, and I had to find a way to move forward. On the fourth day, the phone rang. I saw Mary's name on the screen, and for the first time in weeks, I hesitated before answering. Hello, I said, my voice flat. Rick, we need to talk, she said, her voice strained. Please, can we meet? Just to discuss everything. I don't know if I'm ready for that, Mary, I said, rubbing my temple. The thought of sitting face to face with her, hearing her side of things, made my stomach turn. I understand, she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. But we have to deal with this. The house, the divorce. We need to talk about it. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Fine. Where? There's a cafe in town, she said. We can meet there. Neutral ground. All right, I'll be there. We agreed to meet the next afternoon. As I hung up the phone, I felt the familiar churn of anger and betrayal rise up in my chest. But beneath that, there was something else. Something quieter, sadder. This was the final nail in the coffin. The official beginning of the end. The next day, I drove into town, feeling like I was heading towards some kind of final judgment. The cafe was a small, quiet place on the edge of town, tucked between a bookstore and a pharmacy. It was the kind of place we used to come to on Saturday mornings when the kids were young, grabbing coffee and pastries before heading out for a day of errands. Now, it felt like walking into a crime scene. Mary was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table near the window. She looked tired, her face drawn, her eyes puffy like she hadn't slept in days. It was strange seeing her like this, vulnerable, almost fragile. For so long, I'd thought of her as strong, as the one who held our family together. But now, sitting across from her, I realized just how much had changed. I sat down without saying a word. The silence between us was thick, uncomfortable. Thank you for meeting me, she said quietly, fiddling with the edge of her coffee cup. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I know this isn't easy, she continued, her voice trembling. I know you hate me right now. I don't hate you, I said, my voice rougher than I intended. I'm angry. I'm hurt. But I don't hate you. She looked down, biting her lip. I deserve that. The silence stretched on again, the weight of everything unspoken hanging between us. I'm not here to rehash what happened, Mary, I finally said. We both know what you did. I just want to move forward. She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. I'm sorry, Rick. I'm so sorry. I know, I said quietly. But sorry doesn't change anything. We talked about the house, about the finances, about the practicalities of ending a marriage that had lasted for over 3 decades. It was clinical, detached, like we were strangers negotiating the terms of a business deal. And maybe, in a way, we were strangers now. The people we had once been, young, in love, hopeful about the future, felt like ghosts. When it was all said and done, I stood up to leave. Mary looked up at me, her eyes pleading. Rick, she said, her voice cracking. Please, I don't want it to end like this. Can we at least? I shook my head. No, Mary, it's already ended. And with that, I walked out of the cafe, the weight of 32 years hanging heavy on my shoulders. The air outside the cafe felt colder than before, though maybe that was just the finality of everything settling in. I stood there for a moment, my hands buried deep in my pockets, trying to process what had just happened. Felt surreal, as if I had walked through someone else's life for the past hour. But no, it was mine. This was my reality now. It was over. The house would be sold, the lawyers would get involved, and my marriage would officially be behind me. There wasn't anything left to say. There was no going back, no fixing it, no patching things up. What I had shared with Mary was gone, reduced to a list of assets and liabilities, to memories that now felt tainted. I walked back to the car, my feet feeling heavy with every step. As I slid into the driver's seat, I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to let out the frustration that had been building up inside me for months. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the dashboard, my heart pounding in my chest. What now? That question had been haunting me since the day I found out about the affair, and even though I'd taken steps toward a resolution, I still didn't have an answer. I had no idea what the future looked like anymore. The life I'd built, the future I'd planned, it was all gone. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, driving aimlessly through town. The streets were quiet, the usual buzz of the day lost in the fading light of late afternoon. I drove past familiar places where Mary and I had once shared moments that felt important, moments that had made me believe in us. The park where we'd taken the kids when they were small, the restaurant where we'd celebrated our anniversary every year, the street where we'd bought our first house before the kids were even born. Everything had changed. It was as if my past was being erased, bit by bit, with every mile I drove. I didn't even realize where I was heading until I saw the sign for the highway that led out to the coast. I'd been there just a few days ago, but something about the open water had called to me again. Maybe I was looking for clarity, or maybe I just needed to escape, to feel something other than the weight of my broken marriage. The highway stretched out before me, the horizon fading into the distance. I drove in silence, the soft hum of the engine the only sound in the car. I didn't have a destination in mind, but I kept going, following the road until the landscape shifted from suburban streets to the wide, open space of the coastal highway. The sun was setting by the time I reached the ocean, casting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. The water was calm, stretching out as far as I could see, and for a moment, I felt a strange sense of peace. The vastness of the ocean had a way of making everything else feel small, insignificant. My problems, my heartache, they were just tiny drops in a much larger world. I parked the car near the beach and stepped out, the cool breeze from the ocean hitting me as I walked toward the water. There were a few people scattered along the shore, couples holding hands, families with kids playing in the sand. I kept my distance, walking until I found a spot away from the others, where it was just me and the ocean. I stood there for a long time, watching the waves roll in and out, the sound of the water soothing in its rhythm. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about Mary or the affair or the divorce. I wasn't thinking about the house or the lawyers or how everything had fallen apart. I was just there, in the moment, alone but not lonely. And for the first time, I started to feel like maybe, just maybe, I could get through this. That maybe I could rebuild my life, even if I didn't know what that looked like yet. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and stared at the screen for a moment. I hadn't checked it since leaving the cafe. There were a few missed calls from Mary, but I ignored them. I wasn't ready to hear her voice again, wasn't ready to deal with whatever she thought she needed to say. I scrolled through the contacts until I found the name I was looking for, Chris. I hit dial and waited. He answered after a couple of rings. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice calm, steady. It was comforting in a way I hadn't expected. "Hey," I said, feeling the tension in my chest ease just a little. "I just wanted to check in. I talked to your sister earlier this week. Told her about everything." "Yeah," he said, and I could hear the concern in his voice. "She called me after you left. She's taking it hard." "I know," I said, sighing. I didn't want to hurt her, but I couldn't keep it from her. "You did the right thing," Chris said, and there was no hesitation in his voice. "She needed to know. We both did." We fell into a comfortable silence for a moment, the sound of the ocean in the background, filling the space between us. "How are you holding up?" Chris asked finally. "I don't know," I admitted. "Some days are better than others. I feel lost, Chris. I don't know what to do next." He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was soft but sure. "You don't have to figure it all out right now, Dad. Just take it one day at a time. We'll get through this." "We?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat. "Yeah," he said, and I could hear the sincerity in his voice. You're not alone in this, Dad. Sarah and we're here for you. We're family." The word family hit me harder than I expected. It had been so long since I'd felt connected to anyone, so long since I'd felt like I still had something worth holding on to. But hearing Chris say that reminded me that, even though my marriage was over, I still had something. I still had my kids. I still had my family. "Thanks, Chris," I said quietly, the emotion thick in my voice. I needed to hear that. We talked for a while longer about nothing in particular, about his work, about the kids, about everyday things that made me feel like life hadn't completely fallen apart. And by the time we hung up, I felt a little lighter, a little more hopeful. I stayed by the ocean for a while longer, watching the sun disappear below the horizon, the sky darkening as the stars began to appear one by one. The ocean continued its steady rhythm, constant and unchanging, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I could find that rhythm too. Maybe I could find a way to keep moving forward. A week passed. I stayed at the cabin, focusing on small things, organizing old papers, fixing a leaky faucet, chopping wood for the fire. The tasks were simple, almost mindless, but they gave me something to do, something to keep my hands busy while my mind worked through the wreckage of my marriage. Mary called a few times, leaving messages that I didn't listen to. I wasn't ready to talk to her again. Not yet. I knew we'd have to finalize the divorce soon, but for now I needed space. One evening, as I sat on the porch, sipping a beer and watching the sun set behind the trees, I realized something. The pain was still there, but it wasn't as sharp anymore. It was dull, like a bruise that was slowly healing. I'd never forget what had happened, but maybe, just maybe, I could learn to live with it. Maybe I could move on. The day finally came when I had to return to the house. The realtor had called, saying there was interest from a buyer, and we needed to get everything squared away. It felt strange walking through the front door again, seeing the place where we'd built a life together now reduced to empty rooms and bare walls. I wandered through the house, memories flooding back with every step. The living room where we'd hosted holidays, the kitchen where we'd cooked meals together, the bedroom where we'd shared so many quiet moments. It all felt so far away now, like it belonged to someone else. Mary wasn't there, and for that I was grateful. I wasn't ready to face her again. Not in this place. Not with the memories of everything we'd built and lost still so fresh. As I walked through the house one last time, I felt a strange sense of closure. This chapter of my life was ending, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe it was time to turn the page to start something new. I wasn't sure what the future held. I didn't have a plan, didn't have a roadmap for what came next. But as I stood in the doorway, looking out at the empty house one last time, I realized that I didn't need to have it all figured out. All I needed to do was take it one step at a time. I stood on the front porch of the house, the cool autumn air swirling around me as I took in the sight of the place that had been home for so many years. It felt strange, being here for the last time, knowing that soon enough, it wouldn't be mine anymore. The door was open behind me, and inside, the rooms echoed with emptiness, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the finality of everything. The buyer would be moving in next week. The papers were signed. It was all set, and yet, part of me still clung to the house as if leaving it meant letting go of the life I'd had with Mary. This was where we'd raised our kids, where we'd shared more than 30 years together. It wasn't just a house. It was the backdrop of my life, but it was time to let it go. I stepped off the porch and walked toward my car. The driveway, once filled with the laughter of children riding bikes or playing basketball, was quiet now. I could almost see the ghosts of the past here, playing out in front of me. Chris and Sarah as kids, Mary waving to me from the garden, the family gatherings, the holidays. It was all still there, somehow, but distant, fading with every step I took. I reached the car and paused, turning to look at the house one last time. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel. Relief? Sadness? Maybe a little of both. But what I did know was that I wasn't the same man who had built a life here with Mary. That man had believed in forever, had trusted that love would be enough to hold everything together. Now, standing here on the other side of it all, I knew better. Love wasn't always enough. I got in the car and started the engine, but I didn't drive off right away. Instead, I sat there for a moment, watching the house through the windshield, letting the memories wash over me one more time. I needed to let myself feel it, to mourn what I'd lost before I could fully move forward. And then, with a deep breath, I put the car in gear and drove away. The drive back to the cabin felt longer than usual. The winding roads through the forest stretched out before me, and the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the trees. The familiar weight settled over me, but this time, it wasn't as heavy. It was more of a quiet ache than the sharp pain I'd been living with for the past few months. I wasn't sure what came next, but I was okay with that. For the first time, I wasn't looking to the future with dread. I wasn't trying to piece together a broken life. I was letting go of it little by little. When I got back to the cabin, the light was fading, and the sky was streaked with pink and gold. The lake shimmered in the distance, calm and still, like a mirror reflecting the sky. I parked the car and stepped out, the cool breeze carrying the scent of pine and earth. The cabin, with its creaking porch and worn wooden beams, felt like a sanctuary now, a place where I could start over. I walked to the edge of the lake and sat down on the old dock, my feet dangling over the water. The surface was smooth, untouched by the wind, and as I sat there, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think until now. I was free. The weight of the divorce, the betrayal, the anger, it was still there, but it didn't define me anymore. It didn't hold me captive. Mary had made her choices and I'd made mine. The house was sold, the papers were signed, and our lives, once so intertwined, were now separate. The divorce had finalized a few days ago. It had been a quick, cold process, almost clinical. The lawyers had handled most of it, and by the time we'd sat down to sign the papers, there wasn't much left to say. Mary had cried, but I hadn't. I felt too drained, too tired to muster any more tears. I'd spent enough time grieving over what was lost. Now it was about moving forward. As I sat there by the lake, I pulled out my phone and stared at it for a long moment. I hadn't spoken to Mary since the day we signed the divorce papers. She hadn't called and I hadn't reached out either. We were done, but I still felt like there was one last thing I needed to do. I scrolled through my contacts and found her name, hesitating for just a second before hitting call. It rang twice before she picked up. "Rick," she said, her voice quiet, unsure. "Hey, Mary," I said, my voice calm, steady. I wanted to call and say, "Goodbye." There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear her breathing, the soft sound of her trying to hold it together. "Goodbye." "Yeah," I said, looking out over the water. "I think it's time we put this behind us. For good." She didn't say anything at first, but then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I'm sorry, Rick. I'm sorry for everything." "I know," I replied, and for the first time I meant it. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't holding on to the hurt. But it's done now. We've both made our choices, and we have to live with them. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her voice cracking. "I know," I said softly, "but we can't go back. And honestly, I don't want to. I need to move forward. And I think you do too." There was a long silence on the line, and then she said, "I hope you find peace, Rick. I really do." "I hope you do too, Mary," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "Take care of yourself." "You too," she whispered, and then the line went dead. I sat there for a while, staring at the phone in my hand before slipping it back into my pocket. The conversation felt final. It was the closure I hadn't realized I needed, the last piece of the puzzle finally falling into place. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I had loved Mary, and for a long time that had been enough. But love changes, people change, and sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you can't fix what's been broken. I looked out at the water, the sky now a deep shade of blue as the sun dipped below the horizon. The stars were starting to come out, tiny pinpricks of light scattered across the sky, and as I sat there, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The next few weeks passed quietly. I spent my days fixing things around the cabin, reading old books I hadn't touched in years, and taking long walks by the lake. There was no rush, no pressure to figure everything out. I was letting myself heal, letting myself breathe. Chris and Sarah visited a few times, bringing the grandkids with them. It was good to see them, to feel connected to my family again. We didn't talk much about Mary or the divorce. There was no need. We were moving on, all of us. One evening, as I sat on the porch, watching the sunset with a cold beer in my hand, I realized something. I wasn't lost anymore. I wasn't wandering through the wreckage of my life, trying to make sense of it all. I was here now in this moment, and that was enough. The past was behind me, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I was ready to start living again. "Hey, did you go for a run today?" I asked casually, glancing at her Apple Watch as it lit up with a notification about her activity. "No, of course not," she replied with a quick smile, still focused on her phone. "I've been stuck in meetings all day. Didn't even get a chance to eat properly." I nodded, trying to ignore the strange feeling that crept up my spine. It was just a simple conversation, a simple answer. But the numbers on her watch didn't add up. Her heart rate was unusually high, showing the kind of activity you'd expect from a workout, not from sitting in an office. I pulled my hand away from her watch, telling myself to relax. Maybe I was just overthinking it. Her job was demanding, packed with meetings, client visits, the kind of stress that could spike anyone's heart rate. But the number, 135 beats per minute, kept circling in my mind. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but the question lingered in my head. Why was her heart rate so high if she was just sitting at a desk? It was just a small red flag, and I could have let it go. But that moment, that seemingly innocent question, marked the beginning of everything unraveling. Little things had been piling up over the past few months. The late nights at work, the sudden client meetings that kept happening more and more, the vague answers when I asked about her day. We used to talk for hours about the smallest details of our lives. Now it felt like she was drifting further away, emotionally and physically. I blamed it on stress, on her new project, but seeing those numbers on her watch, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. First, I brushed it off. I told myself I was being paranoid, but week after week, the same pattern started to emerge. Every time she claimed she'd been in meetings all day, her Apple Watch told a different story. There were spikes in activity, high physical activity, always between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. It was strange, too strange to ignore. One evening, I made a decision. I connected her Apple Watch to my phone. She'd given me access casually when we compared our workout stats a while back. It had seemed harmless at the time, but now I was going to use it to track her activity in real time. The next day, she told me she had another meeting with a client. I checked her activity. Once again, there was a sudden spike in her heart rate around 2 p.m., 145 beats per minute. What kind of meeting is this? I thought. My mind scrambled to find an explanation. Maybe she was anxious or stressed. Maybe she got up and walked around? But the data suggested something else, intense physical exertion. I checked her location using the Find My iPhone app. She wasn't at her office. She was at a hotel downtown. A hotel? Why a hotel? What was she doing there? Could have been a business meeting, right? But that sinking feeling in my gut was getting harder to ignore. These strange coincidences, the spiking heart rate, the hotel location during work hours, it was all too much. That night, I waited for her to come home. When she finally did, much later than usual, she looked exhausted, just like she always did after these meetings. I wanted to ask her right then and there to confront her, but something told me it wasn't time. She was smart, sharp. If I jumped the gun without hard proof, she'd just twist things around and make me look crazy. I needed more evidence. So I played the long game. Every time she mentioned another client meeting, I tracked her. And each time it was the same pattern, her activity peaking at the same hours, and her location pointing to that same hotel. Her heart rate, the GPS coordinates, none of it matched the story she kept feeding me. It was happening too often. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The final straw came one afternoon when she told me she was headed to another client meeting. I watched her location pop up on my phone. It wasn't her office again. It was the same hotel. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. I drove to the hotel. The entire way, my mind was spinning with possibilities, explanations, excuses. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was all in my head. But deep down, I knew that I was about to face something I wasn't ready for. I parked near the hotel, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart was racing faster than I could control. This was it. The moment of truth, and I wasn't sure I could handle what I was about to find. But I had come too far to back down now. Minutes felt like hours as I sat there, waiting, watching the entrance. And then there she was, Emily. But she wasn't alone. There was a man with her. I froze, unable to move. At first, they were just talking. But then he leaned in, lightly touching her arm. She laughed in a way I hadn't seen in months, with a warmth that used to be reserved for me. Everything I thought I knew about my life cracked wide open in that single moment. I could have stormed out of the car, confronted them right then and there, but something held me back. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was fear of what would come next. I realized I had no idea what to do next. My whole world, the life I thought I knew, was collapsing right in front of me, and I was powerless to stop it. But this wasn't over. No, not yet. I drove home, my mind racing. Tomorrow I would gather everything. Her location history, her activity data, the lies she told me, and finally, I'd confront her. But I wouldn't be caught off guard. No, I'd give her a surprise she wouldn't forget. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I felt sick to my stomach, my mind replaying everything I'd seen outside that hotel. Emily had already left for work by the time I was up. She kissed me goodbye like every other morning. The same casual, routine gesture, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. But now I had a mission. I needed to gather everything. The evidence, the lies, the hidden truths she thought I'd never see. I had no idea how I would confront her, or what I'd even say when the moment came, but I knew I couldn't go on like this. First, I started by going through her Apple Watch data, pulling up everything from the past few months. The workout spikes, the erratic heart rates, the location history, it was all there, laid out in stark, undeniable detail. Every time she said she was in a meeting, the truth was different. There was a pattern, and now that I could see it clearly, it was horrifying how meticulously planned it all was. From the outside, everything about our life still seemed perfect. We were that couple, happy, stable, everyone's idea of the perfect match. No one would have ever suspected anything. I barely suspected it myself until now. But all those late nights, the client dinners, the random trips out of town, It was all a lie. And the worst part was, I could now trace every one of them back to that hotel. I remembered the first time she'd mentioned him. A new client, she had said, just a few months ago. She talked about him like he was a typical, boring work connection, nothing more. But now, looking back, it was obvious Mike was the one. He was the guy outside that hotel, the guy she laughed with in a way she hadn't laughed with me in ages. I scrolled through her messages while she was in the shower that morning, and there it was, dozens of texts exchanged with Mike. Casual at first, then playful, flirtatious. My stomach turned as I read through them, each one a blow to the gut. They talked about meeting at their spot multiple times. Now I knew where that spot was. They had been meeting at the same hotel for months. She had even shared details with him about our life, things she hadn't bothered to talk to me about in ages. It was like I had become a stranger in my own marriage, a footnote to her new, secret life. My hands shook as I saved screenshots of the texts, the location data from her watch, everything. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was evidence, solid and undeniable. As I pieced it all together, the weight of what I was about to do pressed down on me. Should I confront her today? Or wait? The thought of sitting across from her, watching her lie to my face again, was unbearable. But I also couldn't let my anger get the best of me. I needed to stay calm, in control, and not let her manipulate her way out of this. But that was easier said than done. I couldn't get the image out of my mind. Emily and Mike, outside the hotel, so comfortable with each other. That laugh. The way her eyes lit up when she looked at him. A spark I hadn't seen in our marriage for far too long. I tried to focus on what I was going to say, how I was going to confront her. Would she admit it? Would she deny everything, even with all the proof right in front of her? I knew her. She could be cold and calculating when she needed to be. She'd probably try to turn it all on me, accuse me of invading her privacy, gaslight me into thinking I was imagining things. But there was no imagining this. I had the proof. Later that afternoon, as I sat at work pretending to focus, my phone buzzed. It was Emily. She texted me, saying she had another client dinner and would be home late again. I stared at the message. My jaw clenched. I already knew what she was really doing. I took a deep breath and responded with a simple, "Okay, sounds good." But inside I was boiling. I knew exactly where she was going tonight. The same hotel, the same man, and this time I was going to follow her. But not just to watch. This time I was going to confront her. That evening I waited. The house felt too quiet, too still, as if it already knew the chaos that was about to unfold. Emily had left an hour ago, claiming she had to meet Mike for some work thing. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I drove toward the hotel, my heart racing, my mind spinning with 1,000 possible outcomes. What if I'm wrong? What if they really are just working together? But deep down, I already knew the truth. There was no coming back from this. I arrived at the hotel just in time. I parked far enough away to not be noticed and waited. My pulse pounded in my ears as I saw her car pull into the parking lot. A few minutes later, Mike arrived. They went in together, not bothering to check their surroundings. They didn't even look back. Why would they? They didn't know I was watching. They didn't know I'd been watching for weeks. I sat there, my blood boiling, my mind screaming at me to get out of the car and confront them right then and there. But something held me back. I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed to control the situation, not let my emotions run wild. So I waited. I watched them disappear into the hotel. An hour passed, maybe two. My hands clenched the steering wheel, trying to focus. The thought of them together, right there, just a few floors up, made my skin crawl. Every minute felt like an eternity. I couldn't sit still anymore. I couldn't pretend this wasn't happening. Finally, I couldn't take it any longer. I stepped out of the car, my heart pounding as I walked toward the hotel. Each step felt heavier than the last. I wasn't sure what I was going to say or do, but I was ready for it now. As I reached the lobby, I saw them, walking out of the elevator. Her arm was around his waist, his hand on her back, guiding her out the door. My chest tightened. It was all real. There was no mistaking it anymore. I watched as they walked out together, laughing, carefree, like they had no idea their world was about to come crashing down. And I followed. I could feel my pulse thudding in my neck as I followed them out of the hotel lobby. They didn't see me. How could they? They were too wrapped up in their little bubble, oblivious to the fact that their secret world was about to collapse. Emily was right there, so close. She was smiling. Smiling like I hadn't seen her smile in months. And it wasn't just the smile. It was the way she moved. The way her body seemed relaxed and free. Like she wasn't carrying the weight of any lies. But I knew better now. I had seen the truth with my own eyes. And the smile she gave him was a painful reminder of what I had lost without even realizing it. They walked across the parking lot, heading toward her car. Mike's hands slid down her back as they moved, almost like a reflex. Something so casual it made me sick to my stomach. She didn't flinch. She leaned into him, as if they had done this 1,000 times before. It was in that moment that the truth, the brutal, undeniable truth, hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a fling. This wasn't some fleeting mistake that happened once or twice. This was a relationship, a parallel life she had built outside of our marriage. And I had been completely blind to it. I stepped forward, the air around me suddenly feeling too thick, too heavy. My heart was pounding in my chest as I moved closer, and for a moment, I wondered if they could hear it, if somehow that sound could cut through their laughter and draw their attention. But they just kept walking, unaware. As they reached her car, I was finally close enough to end this. Emily. The word came out sharp, louder than I intended. It was like someone else had spoken it, like my voice didn't belong to me anymore. She froze. Her hand was still on the car door, mid-motion, as if she hadn't fully processed what she'd just heard. Mike turned first, his eyes narrowing, confused, clearly not expecting anyone to interrupt their little moment. Then Emily turned to face me. For a second, I saw panic flash in her eyes, pure, unfiltered panic. And then, just as quickly, it vanished. She blinked, regaining her composure, and when she spoke, her voice was icy, controlled, like she was already preparing her defense. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone flat, almost like I was the one in the wrong. She even had the nerve to frown, as if she couldn't quite believe I'd dare to show up. I felt a wave of anger surge through me, so powerful that it nearly knocked me off balance. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms as I tried to keep myself from exploding right then and there. "What am I doing here?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "I could ask you the same thing, Emily. You're supposed to be at a client dinner. Remember?" Her face tightened. For the briefest of moments, I saw a crack in her armor. But she recovered quickly, slipping into that same calm, calculated expression she always wore when she was trying to control a situation. "I was going to explain." "Explain what?" I cut her off, my voice rising. "Explain how you've been lying to me for months? How you've been meeting this guy." I pointed at Mike, who looked like he wanted to melt into the pavement. "At a hotel, while telling me you were at work." I didn't give her a chance to respond. The anger that had been simmering for so long finally boiled over, and I couldn't hold it back anymore. "Do you know what it feels like, Emily?" My voice cracked. "To watch you walk out of the house every day, to hear you tell me you're going to meet a client, and all the while you're sneaking off to be with him?" I looked at Mike, who now looked thoroughly uncomfortable, standing awkwardly by the car, like he wasn't sure if he should stay or leave. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "How long have you been lying to me?" Emily crossed her arms over her chest, her eyes narrowing. "You're acting crazy," she said, her voice low but steady, each word deliberate, like she was speaking to a child throwing a tantrum. "This isn't what you think it is." I laughed, but it came out hollow, almost choking me. "Really? Because I think I've got a pretty clear picture of what's going on here." I took a step closer, holding up my phone. "I've seen the messages, Emily. I've tracked your location. I know about the hotel. I know about the texts. So don't you dare stand here and act like I'm imagining things." Her eyes flickered toward Mike for a brief second, and I could see the panic starting to return. He stayed silent, but I could tell from his expression that he wanted to be anywhere but here. It was obvious he hadn't signed up for this level of confrontation. Emily turned back to me, but her tone softened just slightly. Okay, listen," she began, lifting a hand as if to calm me down, as if this was just a misunderstanding that she could explain away with a few carefully chosen words. "I didn't mean for you to find out this way. I was going to tell you, I swear. I needed time." "Time for what?" I spat, unable to contain the disgust in my voice. To keep lying to me? To keep sneaking around behind my back? She sighed, exasperated, and rubbed her temples like she was the one who had been wronged in all this. It's not like that, okay? Mike and we've been seeing each other, yes, but it's complicated. Complicated. The word hung in the air, as if the sheer audacity of it was too much to comprehend. You think I care about your complicated relationship with him? You think that makes this better? Mike finally cleared his throat, stepping forward like he was about to say something, but I cut him off before he could even open his mouth. Don't, I snapped, my voice like ice. Don't even try to explain this. He stopped, eyes darting between Emily and me, clearly regretting every decision that had led him to this moment. Emily's face hardened again. She wasn't going to let me see her crack, wasn't going to let me have the satisfaction of watching her break down. Look, she said coldly. We both know this marriage hasn't been working for a long time. You just refuse to admit it. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, staring at her, trying to process what she had just said. The marriage hasn't been working? I've been trying, I said, my voice quiet now, the anger suddenly drained from me. I've been trying to make it work. I've been doing everything I can. She shook her head, dismissive. No, you've been clinging to something that's already dead. I moved on a long time ago, and there it was, the final, brutal truth. She had already left me, long before I even knew there was anything wrong. While I had been fighting to hold on, she had been letting go, piece by piece. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The world seemed to narrow into a single, suffocating point, where everything I thought I knew, everything I thought we had, crumbled into dust. Mike shifted uncomfortably beside her, his guilt obvious, but he said nothing. This wasn't his fight, and he knew it. I stared at her, searching for some sign of the woman I thought I married, but all I saw was a stranger standing in front of me. The love, the warmth, the connection, it was all gone. Fine, I whispered, my voice barely audible. You've made your choice. And with that, I turned around, walking away from the wreckage of what was once my life. I drove aimlessly after I left the hotel. I don't even remember getting into the car. My mind was somewhere else, trying to process what had just happened. Emily's words kept replaying in my head. I moved on a long time ago. That one sentence, as cold and final as a death blow. It was like the life we had built, all the years together, didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. How could she just move on? How could she watch me try to make everything work? Listen to me talk about our future, share plans for a life she no longer wanted, and say nothing, all while sneaking off to hotels with Mike, smiling and laughing like she was living a dream. My dream that we were supposed to share. My phone buzzed, snapping me back to reality. I glanced at the screen. It was Emily. Of course it was. Her text was short, to the point, as if everything hadn't just blown up between us. Emily, let's talk when you're ready. I didn't want you to find out this way. I threw my phone into the passenger seat, not wanting to see any more of her words. When you're ready. She said it like this was something I needed to just get over, like we were negotiating a business deal that went sideways. There was no apology, no remorse. Nothing. I drove for what felt like hours, until the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. It should have been beautiful, but I didn't see any of it. My thoughts were too tangled. Anger, betrayal, humiliation. It all churned inside me, mixing into something dark and bitter. I pulled off the road into an empty parking lot. I sat there, engine idling, staring blankly out the windshield. What now? What was I supposed to do? Part of me wanted to confront her again, scream at her, demand to know why she'd done this. But the other part of me, the part that was exhausted, emotionally drained, knew that would solve nothing. I wasn't going to get the answers I wanted, at least not from her. I shut off the engine and leaned back in my seat, running my hands over my face. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline and asphalt. This wasn't where I expected to end up today, or any day. I had never been a guy who thought his marriage would end like this. Destroyed in a parking lot over the betrayal of a woman who couldn't even bring herself to apologize. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, tried to find some sort of clarity. That's when it hit me, the most gut-wrenching realization of all. She had checked out long before I ever knew. Long before I saw those messages, Before I connected the dots between her high heart rate and her secret meetings, she had been gone. And while I was here, clinging to the idea of our marriage, to the woman I thought she had already moved on. But there was something deeper to it, something darker I hadn't let myself acknowledge until now. It wasn't just that she had moved on. It was how easily she had lied, how comfortable she was in her deceit. There was no guilt, no hesitation. Emily had lied to my face for months, and she did it with the same casual ease she used when telling me what we needed from the grocery store. She was good at it. Too good. I thought back to all the times I had trusted her, all the moments that now seemed so fake. Every time she said she loved me, every time she smiled and told me we were in this together. It was all just a cover for what she was really doing, for who she really was. I remembered that moment outside the hotel, the way she had turned to me, her eyes widening for just a second when I called her name. That split second of panic. Then, just as quickly, she had slipped into damage control mode, speaking to me like I was the one being unreasonable, like I was the one who needed to calm down. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't her being caught off guard. That was who she had become, or maybe who she had always been, and I just hadn't seen it. Someone who could manipulate, lie, and twist the truth without a second thought. And now it wasn't just Mike. There had probably been others. God, how many others? My phone buzzed again. Another text. I reached for it, then hesitated. Did I really want to hear from her right now? Did I really want to see more of her half-truths, her justifications, her attempts to clean up the mess she had made? But it wasn't her. It was a text from my brother, Adam. I hadn't spoken to him in weeks. We weren't as close as we used to be, not since I got married and threw myself into building a life with Emily. He was always more of a no-strings-attached kind of guy, the type to remind me that I needed to look out for myself first. Adam. Hey man, haven't heard from you in a while. You good? For a moment I considered ignoring it. But then something inside me cracked open. I hadn't told anyone what was happening. Not my family, not my friends. I had been living in my own little world, trapped in the spiral of trying to fix something that had been broken beyond repair. I was ashamed to admit that my perfect life wasn't so perfect after all. But now I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I couldn't carry this on my own. Me, not really. Emily's been cheating on me. It's bad. Felt strange to type it out, to see it in writing. Cheating. As if that word could capture everything I'd been feeling. As if it could explain the mess that had been made of my life. But there it was, in black and white. A fact. A truth I could no longer avoid. Adam replied almost immediately. Adam. What the F? Dude. I'm so sorry. Where are you? I told him I didn't even know. Just somewhere, parked, trying to figure out what to do next. He called me within minutes, and hearing his voice on the other end of the line made me feel a little less alone. He didn't say much at first, just let me get it all out, what I'd seen, what I'd heard, how it all started with those damn Apple Watch notifications. That's insane, man, he finally said, his voice low. I had no idea. Yeah, well, neither did I. Are you going to leave her? He asked, the question hitting me harder than I expected. I mean, there's no coming back from this, right? I stared out the window, watching the sunset fade into the night. Leave her. That was the logical answer, wasn't it? There was no fixing this, no going back to the way things were. But the weight of it, the finality of it, made me feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at the wreckage of everything I had ever believed in. I don't know, I said honestly. I don't even know who she is anymore. Listen, Adam said after a long pause. You don't have to make a decision right now, but don't let her string you along. Okay? You deserve better than this. I knew he was right. I deserved better. But it was hard to let go of something that had been my whole world for so long. Even if that world was built on lies. I'll figure it out, I told him. Thanks, man. We hung up, and for the first time all day, I felt a small sense of clarity. It wasn't much, but it was something. I wasn't alone in this anymore. As I sat there in the dark, watching the city lights flicker to life, I realized something else. Emily might have moved on long ago, but now it was my turn. The next move was mine. The next morning came like a wave crashing against a cliff. Sudden, unrelenting. I barely slept. My mind wouldn't turn off, replaying every detail from the night before. Emily's lies, her coldness. The way she stood there with Mike as if everything was perfectly normal. The same woman who I had shared my life with for years, who I had trusted implicitly, now felt like a stranger. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the house we had once called home together, the place where we had laughed, argued, made plans for the future. It all felt hollow now, like the shell of something that no longer existed. I kept thinking about what Adam had said on the phone. "Are you going to leave her?" The question sat heavy in my chest, impossible to ignore. I turned to look at the empty side of the bed where Emily usually slept. She hadn't come home last night. I hadn't expected her to. Not after everything that had happened. There were no texts, no calls from her. It was as if she had silently acknowledged the end, or maybe she was just waiting for me to make the next move. Either way, her absence spoke volumes. I got up, my body moving on autopilot, heading to the kitchen to make coffee. The routine of it, the small, everyday tasks, felt oddly grounding, even though I knew nothing in my life was grounded anymore. The steam rising from the cup in front of me blurred my vision, making it harder to focus. I didn't know what to do next. The thought of leaving her seemed obvious, logical. How could I stay after everything? How could I ever look at her the same way again? The trust was shattered, irreparable. And yet, even with all the anger, the betrayal, the disgust, there was a part of me that hesitated. Maybe it was the years we had spent together, the shared memories, the idea that once upon a time this had all been real. Or maybe it was just the fear of the unknown, of stepping into a life without her, after having built so much with her. But then, in the quiet of that morning, something shifted in me. A thought crept in, subtle at first, then growing louder with each passing second. What if this was a gift? The idea startled me at first, like my own mind was betraying me. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Yes, Emily had lied. Yes, she had betrayed me in the worst possible way. But maybe this was the push I needed. Maybe I had been clinging to something that wasn't right for me for a long time, even before Mike came into the picture. Maybe I had been afraid to face the truth, that our marriage had been crumbling long before her affair. Her betrayal wasn't the cause of everything falling apart. It was just the final crack that made the entire structure collapse. I couldn't stay trapped in this cycle anymore, trying to fix something that was long past saving. Emily had made her choice, but now I realized it was my turn to make mine. I wasn't going to let her dictate my life any longer. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define who I was or where I went from here. I poured the coffee into a travel mug, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. The sky was a muted gray, the kind of morning that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I didn't have a plan, but my feet moved instinctively, carrying me toward the place where I knew I could start sorting through everything. I ended up at a park not far from our house. It was quiet this early in the morning, a few joggers moving along the paths, the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere. I sat down on a bench overlooking the small lake, the water still and glassy, reflecting the overcast sky. I let the stillness wash over me, my mind finally starting to settle. This was the first moment of real calm I had felt in weeks, maybe even months. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, but eventually, the thoughts I had been trying to avoid came into focus. This isn't about her anymore. That's what kept ringing in my mind. Emily had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. It wasn't just about whether to leave her. It was about what kind of life I wanted going forward. A life where I didn't have to constantly question my partner's loyalty. A life where I wasn't living in someone else's shadow, trying to hold onto something that no longer existed. For the first time, I could see beyond the wreckage of our marriage. I could see a future, one where I wasn't tied to the past, to the lies, to the betrayal. I could see myself letting go, not just of Emily, but of the version of myself who had clung to this relationship out of fear. I could be free in a way I hadn't even realized I needed to be. The decision was becoming clearer now, not easy but necessary. I pulled out my phone and opened our text thread. I hadn't responded to her last message, the one where she'd said, "Let's talk when you're ready." I read it again, then deleted it. She didn't deserve the privilege of deciding when we'd talk, of dictating the terms of our inevitable final conversation. I opened a new message and typed out what I needed to say. I'm done, Emily. I've seen enough. I'll come by later to get my things. We can talk after that, but there's nothing left for us to salvage. I'm filing for divorce. I hovered over the send button for a few seconds, feeling the weight of those words. This was it, the final step, I could almost hear her reaction in my head. The panic, the anger, the attempts to manipulate, to make me doubt what I'd seen and heard. But it wouldn't work this time. I was done. I hit send. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the phone screen, waiting for something to happen, for a response, for the weight in my chest to lift. But there was only silence, the same quiet that had followed me for weeks. But this time, the silence wasn't suffocating. Felt different, lighter. I stood up, taking one last look at the still water in front of me. I didn't know exactly what my next steps would be, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back. The life I thought I had, the marriage I thought I could save, it was gone. And now it was time to start building something new. As I walked back to my car, I felt the smallest glimmer of something I hadn't expected. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was hope. A small spark that maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay after all. Later that afternoon, I returned to the house. Emily's car was in the driveway. She was inside waiting for me. I could feel the tension before I even opened the door. My heart raced a little, not out of fear, but because I knew this was it, the final confrontation. When I stepped inside, she was sitting at the kitchen table, her arms crossed, her face tight with frustration. She looked up when I walked in, but didn't say anything at first. "So," she finally said, her voice cold, "You're really doing this?" I didn't sit down. I stood there, looking at her, feeling none of the anger I thought I would, just a strange sense of finality. "Yeah," I said quietly, "I am." For a moment, she didn't respond. I could see her jaw clenching, her mind working, trying to figure out the best way to spin this in her favor. But I wasn't giving her that chance. "You made your choice, Emily," I continued, my voice steady. "And now I'm making mine. I'm done. I'm not going to fight with you. I'm not going to argue. I'm leaving." She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand, stopping her. There's nothing left to say. For the first time, I saw something flicker across her face. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was panic. But it didn't matter anymore. Not to me. I grabbed a few things from the bedroom, enough to get by for the next few days. I didn't linger, didn't let myself get caught up in the memories that clung to every corner of this house. When I walked back to the front door, Emily was still sitting at the table, staring at me. I paused, hand on the door handle, and looked back at her one last time. "I hope you get what you want," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But it's not me." And with that, I left. As I walked to the car, the door closing behind me, I felt the weight finally lift. I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward something, toward freedom, toward myself.